Hello, folks. Anybody else there?
I found the unmute button and it tells me that you can hear me.
My God.
It's more posh now, and I might find most things.
Except I can't find the notes. Now I'm confused. It just brought me to MD.
Let me look that up. I can post the note link to the list. Sorry, to the chat.
Yeah, because I click on it, just like I said, it brings me to a new note. That's weird.
Maybe it is not filled in, so I would not.
Oh, maybe that's what it is. I
Possible.
thought it has been by default. Got it. Now I see it.
And I can see your cursor, so that's the same document. And now you are typing February.
Are you going to take notes, Steve?
I am going to try to take as much as I can, and I will take every bit of assistance that people will provide.
Well said.
Thanks as ever, Steve. I'll also jump in and overwrite notes.
You mean change history?
Well, I think you'll find it's making history.
Sorry.
And to make history being written by not only the winner, the link for notes is also now in chat.
Yes. It's extremely helpful because it allows you to open HedgeDoc in a separate tab, which allows you to actually participate and write notes at the same time. Okay, I'm going to call it on 4 minutes today rather than 6 because there's probably a lot to do. So one more brief pause and then we'll get going. Okay, there it goes. So, hi everybody. I'm not going to say much. As I said, there's a lot for people to talk about of substance. So, just to say thanks very much to the participants, authors, and editors who have got 05 out. As mentioned, there are some simplifications and there are some points of discussion to be had on that, but it's overall a really great step forward and a step towards having a draft for 119. So that's really great. All I wanted to say or remind people of is the old motto of IETF, which is rough consensus and running code. Rough consensus is better than never-ending full consensus, and running code is better still, because that can help. So I want to just make sure the couple of the issues that are open are issues that have been spoken round and round many times, and I think nobody's ever going to be 100% satisfied, but we have a couple of implementations floating around now that can help guide us. So yeah, I don't know who wants to take the lead on issues discussion or the 05, but Steve, just because you took it last time, I'll hand it over to you.
So just to kick things off, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll type while you're talking.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was actually just trying to type some notes here. So we definitely,
Steve, just let me jump in for a formal thing, because this is the IETF virtual interim meeting for SCITT. We are operating under Notewell, of course, and
Of course.
nobody who's
Yes.
not aware of Notewell has to be making himself aware or herself aware. Sorry.
Thank you, Henk. Well said. And the other thing that we would normally have to do, we don't have to do because everybody's signed in with their real names. So blue sheets and sign-ups and presence is all taken care of by the system. But yes, well caught. Thank you.
So just on the scope of rough consensus, we have definitely been focused on bringing the draft to a last call at 119. So we are trying to be time-based and making sure the quality hits where we're comfortable. So we wanted to shift so that when we're at these meetings, we actually have drafts to review rather than GitHub issues or GitHub PR. So it's certainly a place for people to follow up, but we wanted to follow data tracker. So in that sense, in the last 2 weeks, we've been working to get that draft updated, and we merged in quite a bit that was intended to trim and cull it down, and we might have swung the pendulum far. So as the notes in the email went out this weekend. So with that, we definitely want to go through a couple of the topics that people have strong feedback on. I'm looking to see who's here, but by all means, raise hands, and we'll go through the ordering. I know the registration policy and initialization was a hot topic. So I'm looking for the hands raised. Anybody want to jump in? Because I know that there was a big conversation around initialization and registration.
Henk is there. Let's recognize Henk.
Yeah. So just to kickstart the issue we created, of course, was to address another issue. And that was that we kind of went all overboard with the registration policy while leaving it undefined, which created a loop of never-ending loop of how do we do that. And so by reducing the amount, that's why the massive PR started with policy. Is now the intent was to reduce registration policy, and to some extent, I am a supporter of that approach. Some policy remains, and that pertains to a big part, I think, to the initialization of the ledger. Because how would you kickstart the first nodes in, let's say, a tree? If the ledger is a tree, what should the first tree be? And there is this fundamental axiom we have written into the initialization, maybe going all overboard, so we can tone it down again, which is basically, in a nutshell, we refer to as key before signature. So the first thing to imprint the transparency servers in this ledger with is most likely key material about the issuer, that is the owner. It also takes on the role of the owner of the transparency servers and the corresponding ledger. And so that's where we started. And I'm a fan of automation, not to take up too many words. And in order to enable automation, there has to be the succession. If you do not want to end up with that, you can't register anything anymore because there's no key material for you to vet that. That should be in the ledger itself for a interoperability across all SCITT ledgers. And that might be a problem. Maybe this is an application layer problem and no policy has to be in there. And that is something we can, there's maybe a spectrum here now between these two extremes. And that's one topic, I think. And to read
John,
out loud, Ori highlights that arguable too much policy still remains, which is that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I have my chair hat on or off for this comment, but I would just observe that from the email conversation and a couple of other things on the IETF Slack, that specificity, I thought we had collectively come to a conclusion on this already by having the configuration idea. So at 118, we indeed diagrammed and announced the configuration idea. So that would include things like the public key for the service itself and any registration policy, and indeed some things that don't seem like registration policy, but are still important to knowing whether or not you want to use a particular transparency service, all bound up in the same moral idea of key before signature, or policy before enforcement in that case, and would, I think, solve an awful lot of this to say, you have a policy, you're held to the policy by applying it to the ledger before you can accept anything, but we don't need to talk about odd over specifics of what goes into what bits of a Merkle tree in vague way. So I think that might be a route, a quite rapid route to resolution. Steve?
Yeah, so I think that's part of what, at least some of the conversation has been happening since that, is if a registration policy and configuration as thin as possible, because we've intentionally avoided a lot of specificity, then should a registration policy be potentially be null? If a receipt has to reference the configuration and an instance doesn't want to create a registration policy, why force them to create a registration policy that basically has nothing in it? And should the receipt basically have the ability to have a nil on the registration? And a verifier can decide that, well, that's not very interesting and I don't care. That was it.
So I'm back in the queue. So for the purposes of getting a spec done, and I think from a point of view of usefulness, there is a big difference between being silent and saying, I don't have a policy. So I think there is actually there's a benefit to the spec in terms of having a shape and a defined way of publishing the policy for people who want to have one, or services that want to implement one. And I do also think it's kind of useful if you're, as a middle person or an end user, trying to decide whether you want to interact with the transparency service or whether you care about the receipts that it's creating, that it explicitly says, I am not enforcing any special registration policies, or these other ideas that came up about how often it rolls its public keys, or how it manages its internal security mechanism. So I think the arguments about signing nulls or null being elided, I think we are less useful than just writing down that you're allowed to have an empty policy. Go, Henk.
Yeah, so what I hear basically is there's room for improvement, and if there is a easier way that would exclude, to go with always comment, still too much policy, and tone that down yet, fine. So what I hear is someone is creating a PR for this, and then we can look at it. We just want to scrap initialization entirely, which is possible, I think. But or would you point to the scrappy document and say this is handled in that scope, so look there?
Does anyone want to volunteer to write that PR? I have a fairly good view of what it would look like, so I'm happy to do it if the group is happy for me to do it. But if anybody else wants to, then I'd be grateful.
You can wear multiple hats.
I know. As I said earlier, I'm trying to separate church and state as much as possible. But with the arguments had, I think there's some editorial that would help, if nothing else. So yeah, happy to do that. AJ?
Can you hear me?
Can this time, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So we're saying remove, is this PR, is the scope of this PR? I'm walking around and doing something. Is removing initialization conversation? I can volunteer to do that.
I think so. I'm happy to do the editorial on the section that I think would make it much less ambiguous and much easier to get to the running code place. So what if you want to do the removal PR, and I'll do an editorial on the section, and we can see which one we prefer. That would be good.
All right, I'll try to do that in the next 30 minutes. Or does it have to be now?
No, it doesn't have to be now.
Okay.
That would be amazing. But no. Okay, cool. So that's kind of progress on that. So what else is left over? That was obviously the most controversial piece. What else do we need to
I think the other one was the what gets persisted. There's a conversation around receipts being persisted or the signed statements. What should the registration what should the transparency service actually persist, and what should it return when you're asking, for instance, the feeds?
So I'm going to jump in here and just try to restate what I hope is undisputable where we are at the moment. And that is that registration is the process of processing a signed statement, adding something to the append-only log. I think we're typically calling that a hash or a digest. Let's call it a digest to the append-only log. And during that, creating a receipt that the registrar send to the transparency service. So you send a signed statement and you get a receipt back. The process of creating a transparent statement, I'm the strong assumption, is happening outside the transparency service. When you stuff the receipt into your signed statement, it becomes the transparent statement. So and even sending the whole signed statement, and that is just a side note, might not be necessary if you do decoupled payload. So that's my recap and my understanding.
I think I'm up. So the verifiable data structure is the thing that produces like receipts. So when if we want to say like bytes go into a thing, what we're really saying is like bytes go into a verifiable data structure, and that allows for an operator to produce a receipt for those bytes. Depending on the data structure, it could be that that data structure only stores hashes. Like that's what RFC 9162 stores. It only stores hashes. But there could be other data structures out there that are like very complicated that have to store more than just a hash in a list. So I think I would just be extra cautious about the normative references we're making. Like we're making a normative reference to this cometer draft, which is titled Merkle trees, but that's confusing to people because it's not just a way to do Merkle trees. It's a way to get receipts for a set. So if you've got some system and you're storing multiple entries in it, you can produce receipts from it. Doesn't matter whether it's a Merkle tree or a cryptographic accumulator or some other fancier data structure. The normative reference is you have to have a verifiable data structure, and it needs to support an inclusion proof. And that's what you use to build a SCITT receipt. There's this adjacent services topic, which basically is that's new in the new version. And that's a way to say, hey, like you probably want to be able to produce more than just receipts. And you could use adjacent services to produce more than just receipts. But in terms of the current sort of architecture, the way that I think about it is you have bytes come in and bytes come out. The bytes going in are a signed statement, and the bytes going out are asynchronously a receipt. And that's the fundamental operation the architecture supports. Anything other than that is adjacent services, in my view. That's it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, Robin. You may still be muted, Robin. I'm not sure.
I pressed the wrong button. Thank you, John.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
You're still in the queue.
So you can hear me.
Yes, off you go.
So when Henk was speaking about what he hoped was obvious, you submit a statement and you get a receipt back. It would be useful to avoid requiring that the receipt is essentially part of the request loop where you get it back immediately. Is that something that is accommodated?
So your connection broke up a tiny bit at a crucial moment there, Robin, but I think the question was, are we accommodating the existing behavior of all of the demo and emulator code, which is that you submit the statement, you get back a temporary identifier for a long-running operation, and at some point later on, the receipt is fetchable. And this might be for reasons of convenience, it might be for reasons that eventual consistency takes a while, and so on. Was that the thrust?
Yeah, exactly. Or you're just not interested in a receipt for every statement that you submit. I'm interested in this topic because for some data structures, the receipt that you get a year from now can be provably identical to the one that you would have got if you'd have requested it at the time. And that gives quite a lot of useful flexibility for various things.
So Henk?
Yeah, so I think the actual architecture is silent about the latency. If the latency is a year, we can make that explicitly that latency is not the issue here, as long as if you want that receipt for the first time, it's that receipt. Sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, cool. Thanks.
About what's that, Robin? If you could create an issue for that feature request, that latency for receipt, I want to say conveyance to the, it has implications that are authority, because if I'm registering something and a year later someone else is getting the receipt because I forgot to take it from the counter, I don't know, maybe I forgot the get operation or something, that might not be the greatest thing. There's some security consideration, but these probably go to the API and not to the architecture. But if you can write up a small issue about the actual thing, and then maybe some frosting with implications might go to security consideration of Scrappy or something, then we can track that.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, pushing to Scrappy would be great. Thank you. Ray.
Okay, so I understand that first part. You submit a statement. I guess it could be normally signed, but I guess you don't really control that. But then it's put into the log and we get a receipt, and then you can put the first two things together. But later there needs to be some action where you come back and you can check on the item and see that it actually matches what was originally put in somehow. Is that described? Am I right about that? That is kind of a necessary part of this whole thing, that you have to be able to check on the thing that you have against the transparency service in some manner.
I don't know if anybody wants to answer that, but I'll fill the silence if we don't want to. So this has been a perennial discussion that we've had, and I agree with you that yes, absolutely, the thing you mentioned has to be possible. The question is whether it has to be normatively codified, if that makes sense, in the architecture document, and or if we need to normatively specify it in Scrappy in order to make it interoperable. So the question has often come up, how much of this needs to be in the standard building blocks, and how much of it is kind of an extension to a system that's built around the building blocks. And a large part of the 117 hackathon, and a large part of what I think we're hoping to do at 119 hackathon is to see exactly how wide those edges need to be pushed. But for sure, there is it shouldn't be precluded that a system built with the building blocks can't somehow index or return or compare things that you've got in your hands, because the alternative to that is that every single thing you ever submit, you have to also then keep all the receipts for it and remember where they are and not lose them, and remember they have to be transferred every time you move them around, which I understand a few people in this group actually want to do it that way, but most won't. It will be very awkward from an application point of view. So I think we need to make absolutely sure that what you said isn't precluded by the architecture spec. But I think, unless I'm going to make a statement, and if anybody thinks this statement is wrong, please let me know. But I think with the sort of simplifications and concentrating on the hard bits of the sort of crypto and receipt interoperability, I don't think the spec says anything now in the architecture about how you do that. So it doesn't say you can't, it doesn't say you can, it just gives you the building blocks to be able to do that in some piece of code somewhere.
But if you just have a receipt, isn't the problem, there's a problem in that it could be forged and look like a good receipt, but actually not be a good receipt until you go back into the transparency service and say, somehow, I mean, you have to be able to somehow authenticate that the receipt is legitimate. How do you do that without, I mean, I just don't understand the round trip. I understand the thing about like saying, here's the kind of service and submission policy we have. You submit it, you get a receipt. But certainly there has to be some way. Does the receipt stand alone, and by inspecting the receipt you can tell that it is legitimate, or is the way that this is envisioned where if you have a receipt, then you can check it somewhat, but to really check it, wouldn't you have to go back to the transparency service and somehow check to see that indeed it is in there? Maybe I'm missing something. I just don't understand those. How is this intended to work now?
So the verifiable data structures make it almost completely standalone. So the reason why, well, my reading of the reason why there's some differences of opinion in the group on whether this be specified and how it be specified and how it work, actually is tied to the whole registration policy thing as well, which is depending on your threat model, where in order to verify these things, you need to have some small number of facts available to you in order to verify the verifiable data structure and the insertion of the actual data and whether you're looking at the correct tree or not. And in some cases where you have a good relationship with the transparency service over a long period of time, the thing that you said makes sense and is the way a lot of these I expect are going to work. But there are some considerations where, for example, again, to your point, it would be possible for a transparency service, possibly years in the future after it's been bought by Evil Corp and they target you as a victim, for you to make requests to it, and it could suddenly magic up a whole new tree just for you, which is cryptographically sound and consistent and contains a bunch of data, but isn't the tree that it gives to everybody else, or isn't the same tree it gave you last time. And the crucial question is, whether that kind of fiddling or malfeasance in the service itself is higher or lower in your threat profile compared to things like having multiple services, compared to things like, well, you trust the transparency service, but you don't trust the thing that's giving you the original artifact back. So yeah, it's application specific, which of these things are more or less important. But yes, effectively, the receipts almost stand alone and are verifiable, with the exception that you obviously have to know which transparency service state you're comparing it against. And that's the crucial thing to know, where you get that from, whether you store it immediately and then never trust anybody again, or whether, quite the contrary, you always check it.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to need, maybe somebody can point to me where, like, how is it done that you take the receipt and you can, just by inspecting it with internal information, or do you need also a reference to another root of trust, such as a registrar of some kind, that you're going to check back with a public key or something in there, and then you trust that other thing such that now you can trust this thing? I mean, it seems like any kind of standalone blob of data is not going to be able to verify itself unless you have some other thing that is verified. And if you send it back to the thing and you say, okay, indeed, I don't think there's any way to get around if Evil Corp takes over and they lie to you. But assuming that you can trust the transparency service, then you would like to then check the thing that you have to see that it indeed is the thing that it somehow, maybe you send back a little smidget of it or something, and it says, yeah, that's the thing that we produced. Anyway, okay, so yeah. I'll get out of the way. I know there's a lot of things to discuss, and it's probably just my not understanding it rather than anything critical. Thank you.
Well, that's okay. So I think we've got it in the minutes, and I'll certainly have a look. But I think it is one of those things that we need to not preclude for sure. Yeah, but we may get away with not actually specifying exactly how it needs to work. Yeah, getting that extra piece of information. You're dead right, Ray. But the question of where you get it from and why you trust it is application or use case specific, and so it's tricky to write one thing down and have it work for everybody. Cool, thank you. Yeah, it's a good area. So what else is there? I'm sure I remember one other thing that I wanted to point out. Anybody else got hot buttons or context they want to raise, or PRs that they'd like other people to do?
I was thinking it might be, it is the Brisbane meeting. It seems like it's right around the corner now. Should we start planning for that and in these meetings, or is it a little bit too early?
We probably can. I think I need to double check. I thought I'd put one last meeting on the agenda for a couple of weeks' time specifically to concentrate on that, but I could be wrong. Certainly, it's never too early to talk about hackathon. So hackathon outcomes would be interesting. The biggest thing from a sort of real IETF perspective is that we actually want to have a candidate draft. So certainly not opening up new cans of worms. But sure, do you have hopes and dreams for 119 that you'd like to discuss?
Well, I do have a specific use case that I'm working on, but I know it's a little bit off track. What I'm going to do is attempt to write it up using actual code to show what the data structures would look like, and so I can understand it, because I'm still got some blurry areas, and that will certainly help me, and I think everyone else to maybe understand more about what it is. And I had Hank volunteer to look at what I'm doing, so maybe in the next period of time I can work on that. I've got things lined up, so I'm kind of like ready to to work on it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, that'd be great, and we'll yeah, we can assist you with that too. That'll be good. Cool. Okay, Robin.
Hi. Yeah, so the last thing that was on my mind from the draft was the I think it was a requirement that the issuer of the signed statement needs to be live verified before the statement is added to the log. Have I interpreted that correctly? So as well as this service having authentication of the API service for the person who's putting the statement on the service, are we additionally saying that the transparency service should verify the identity of the statement issuer?
Henk seems to have an answer for you.
As a suspicion. So if we are saying that the current amount of registration policy is still too much, I would say there can be, initially there's absolutely zero expectation, as is on the latency here. You can't, without any other input, which for example could be configuration or registration policies or something from the API, assume anything. So if you don't know, your item will be added to the verifiable data structure. Just as that. That is the minimum expectation you should always have, unless you find other non-SCITT architecture defined policy. That's how I understand it right now.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good, yeah, and I don't know if you've seen the reply on the list yet, Robin, but Ori also had some input on the later section on that topic, which
Oh, I never saw that.
yeah,
Sorry.
suggests there's a little bit of hangover that can just be removed, and then what Henk said. I think that's an easy one to close off.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so I'm very keen to try and get these things closed. So I think there's 2 PRs promised that are kind of important, and otherwise it's I think we've come to understanding on everything else that was discussed on the list, so that's awesome. So let's try to get those. AJ said 30 minutes. I can't do mine in 30 minutes, but I'll do it today. So any more? Does anyone else have any particularly anything in mind that would prevent us getting to a draft by the 119 deadline? Other than the Herculean amount of effort that it takes, and again recognizing how much has been done since the last meeting, that sounds great. So unless there's other items people really want to raise, I think let's reserve our brain power for getting that draft ready version done, and we can call it a day early. Going once, going twice. Okay, let's call it. So thanks very much. We'll see you in the PRs and issues and the mailing list.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.